The steamer trunk sat in the middle of Valentina Rossi's bedroom like a coffin, its brass corners gleaming in the pale morning light that filtered through lace curtains. Her grandmother had made 40 years ago. Inside, her entire life had been folded and packed by hands that weren't her own, chosen by people who had never asked what she wanted to take into her uncertain future. At 23, Valentina possessed the kind of beauty that made men forget their manners and women check their reflections with sudden insecurity. Her dark hair fell in waves past her shoulders, and her eyes held depths that spoke of intelligence carefully hidden behind the mask of dutiful daughter. But today, those eyes reflected only resignation. "It's time, cara mia," her mother said. From the doorway, her voice heavy with the weight of tradition and financial necessity. "The car will be here in an hour." Valentina stared at the trunk, then at her mother's face, searching for any sign that this nightmare might still be averted. "Mama, please. There has to be another way." "There is no other way." Maria Rossi entered the room, her steps heavy with a grief she couldn't acknowledge. "Your father's debts to the Torino family must be paid. This marriage will settle everything and secure your future." "My future is what?" "A stranger's property. Your future as the wife of one of the most powerful men in New York. Don Antonio Torino could have chosen anyone, Valentina. He chose you." Valentina laughed bitterly. "He chose me like someone chooses a horse at auction, based on bloodlines and appearance, not on anything that matters." Her mother sat heavily on the bed, suddenly looking every one of her 52 years. "In our world, marriages are about survival, not romance. Your father gambled away everything we had. This arrangement saves our family from complete ruin. And what about what I want? What you want is a luxury we can no longer afford." The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Valentina had known this day was coming for 3 months, ever since her father had stumbled home drunk and desperate, confessing to debts that would take 3 lifetimes to repay through honest work. Don Antonio Torino had offered a solution: marriage to his family's youngest daughter in exchange for forgiveness of all debts, and a generous dowry that would allow the Rossi family to maintain their dignity. It was, by any measure, an extraordinarily generous offer. It was also a cage, disguised as salvation. "Tell me about him," Valentina said quietly. "Tell me about the man I'm supposed to spend my life with." Maria's expression grew thoughtful. "He's 35, a widower. His first wife died in childbirth 5 years ago. He's known to be fair in his business dealings, careful with his money, protective of his family, and what? Is he kind? Does he laugh? Does he read books or just financial reports? Will he expect me to be silent decoration for his dinner table, or will he care about my thoughts?" Maria was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know, Figlia. I've only met him twice, both times to discuss the arrangements. He seemed serious, controlled, not cruel, but not warm either. So I'm marrying a stranger who may or may not treat me like a human being. You're marrying a man who could have demanded immediate payment of your father's debts and destroyed our family completely. Instead, he offered an honorable solution." Valentina walked to her window, looking out at the narrow streets of Little Italy where she had spent her entire life. After today, this view would belong to her past, replaced by whatever world Don Torino inhabited. "Did he ask to meet me before agreeing to the marriage?" "No. He accepted your father's offer based on your reputation and—" Maria hesitated. "And what?" "And a photograph. Your father showed him the picture from your cousin's wedding." Valentina closed her eyes, remembering that day 6 months ago, when she had worn her best dress and smiled for the camera, never imagining that photograph would seal her fate. "So he's marrying a picture, and I'm marrying a stranger." A car horn honked outside, sharp and impatient. Valentina's stomach clenched with terror and something that might have been grief for the life she would never have. "It's time," Maria said softly. Valentina took one last look around her childhood bedroom, memorizing details she might never see again. The books stacked on her nightstand, the painting she had made in art class, the small mirror where she had practiced different expressions, dreaming of the day when someone would love her for who she was rather than what she represented. "Mama," she said as they carried her trunk downstairs, "what if he's cruel? What if he doesn't want a wife? Just an ornament. What if I'm miserable for the rest of my life? Maria stopped on the stairs, setting down her end of the trunk. Then you'll do what women in our families have always done. You'll survive. You'll find ways to be happy despite your circumstances. You'll build a life that means something, even if it's not the life you would have chosen. And if I can't, then you'll pretend until pretending becomes real. It's what marriage is, Kara. It's what being a woman is. The car waiting outside was black and expensive, driven by a man in a dark suit who loaded her trunk without meeting her eyes. As they drove through the familiar streets toward her unknown future, Valentina watched her neighborhood disappear behind them. She was leaving behind everything she had ever known to live with a man who had chosen her from a photograph, who had paid her father's debts in exchange for exclusive rights to her future. But as terrified as she was, Valentina made herself a promise. She would not disappear into this marriage. She would not become a silent, grateful ornament in Don Torino's house. Somehow, someway, she would find a way to remain herself, even if it killed her. The Torino estate sat behind iron gates, like a small kingdom unto itself, its manicured gardens and imposing architecture speaking of power accumulated over generations. As the car wound up the circular drive, Valentina caught glimpses of men in dark suits stationed at various points around the property, their presence both protective and intimidating. The house itself was beautiful in the way that money could make anything beautiful. Classical columns, marble steps, windows that gleamed like jewels in the afternoon sun. It looked like the kind of place where happiness was optional, but appearances were mandatory. "Miss Rossi," said the driver, opening her door with practiced courtesy, "Don Torino is waiting for you in the library." Valentina followed a housekeeper through halls lined with oil paintings and fresh flowers, her heels clicking against marble floors that probably cost more than her family's annual income. Everything was perfect, tasteful, expensive. Everything was also cold as a tomb. The library was a revelation. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with volumes that showed signs of actual use. Comfortable chairs arranged near tall windows. A fireplace that had clearly provided warmth for real conversations, rather than just decoration. For the first time since arriving, Valentina felt like she could breathe. "Miss Rossi." The voice came from behind her, deep and careful. Valentina turned to face the man she was supposed to marry, and found herself looking into the darkest eyes she had ever seen. Don Antonio Torino was tall and lean, with the kind of presence that filled a room even when he stood perfectly still. His black hair was touched with silver at the temples, and his face was marked by lines that spoke of decisions no man should have to make. He was handsome in the dangerous way that made smart women make foolish choices, but it was his expression that caught her attention. Not the predatory satisfaction she had expected, but something that looked almost like nervousness. "Don Torino," she said, offering a slight curtsy that her mother had drilled into her. "Please sit." He gestured toward one of the comfortable chairs near the fireplace. "Would you like coffee, tea, something stronger?" "Coffee, please." As he prepared the coffee himself rather than calling for a servant, Valentina studied his movements, precise, controlled, but not without grace. His hands were steady as he poured, and she noticed a thin scar across his left knuckles. "You're probably wondering why I asked to meet with you before the wedding," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "I assumed you wanted to inspect your purchase." The words came out sharper than she had intended, but Valentina was tired of pretending this was anything other than a business transaction. Don Torino was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face. "Is that what you think this is? A purchase, isn't it? My father owed you money he couldn't pay. You're accepting me as payment." The mathematics seemed fairly straightforward. The mathematics, yes. The reality is more complicated. "How so, Don?" Torino stood and walked to one of the tall windows, his hands clasped behind his back. "Miss Rossi, I could have demanded immediate payment of your father's debts. I could have seized your family's property, ruined your father's reputation, made it impossible for him to work in this city again. Why didn't you? Because destroying desperate people serves no purpose except cruelty. Your father made mistakes, but he's not a bad man. He doesn't deserve to have his family destroyed because of his weakness for cards and dice. Valentina sipped her coffee, which was perfectly prepared, and considered this unexpected glimpse into her future husband's character. So the marriage proposal was an act of mercy? The marriage proposal was a solution that benefits everyone involved. Don Torino turned from the window to face her. Your family's debts disappear. Your father's reputation remains intact. You gain the protection and security of the Torino name. And you gain a wife who had no choice in the matter. Which brings me to why I wanted to meet with you today. Don Torino returned to his chair, leaning forward slightly, as if what he was about to say required her complete attention. Miss Rossi, I'm going to ask you something that may surprise you. I want you to think carefully before you answer. Valentina felt her heart begin to race. What? Do you want to marry me? The question hit her like a physical blow. Of all the things she had expected him to say, this wasn't among them. What do you mean? I mean exactly what I asked. Setting aside your father's debts, setting aside family obligations and financial arrangements, do you, Valentina Rossi, want to become my wife? Valentina stared at him, searching for the trap she was certain must be hidden in the question. Does my answer matter? It's the only thing that matters. I don't understand. Don Torino leaned back in his chair, his expression serious, but not unkind. 3 months ago, your father came to me desperate and afraid. He offered his daughter's hand in marriage to settle his debts. I could have said yes immediately. Instead, I spent 3 months learning everything I could about you. Learning what? That you taught yourself to read French by borrowing books from the library. That you volunteer at St. Mary's Orphanage every Sunday, reading stories to children who have no one else to care about their education. That you've been supporting your family financially by working as a seamstress, though you told them the money came from your grandfather's inheritance. Valentina felt heat rise in her cheeks. You've been spying on me. I've been trying to understand the woman I was considering asking to share my life. There's a difference. And what did you conclude? From your investigation, I concluded that you're intelligent, compassionate, independent, and far too good for an arrangement that treats you like property to be transferred between men. Valentina set down her coffee cup with trembling hands. Then why are we here? Because I want to offer you a choice, a real choice. Don Torino stood and walked to his desk, returning with a leather folder that he placed on the small table between them. Option 1, he said, opening the folder to reveal legal documents. We proceed with the marriage as arranged. Your father's debts are forgiven, your family is secure, and you become my wife in name and in law. And option 2? Option 2 is that I forgive your father's debts without any marriage arrangement. You're free to leave here today and never see me again. Free to choose your own husband, your own life, your own future. Valentina felt the world tilt around her. Why would you do that? Because I've spent 5 years living with the regret of a marriage where my wife had no choice. Because I believe that love worth having is love freely given. Because you deserve better than to be traded like a commodity. And if I choose option 2, if I walk away, then I wish you happiness and mean it completely. And if I choose option 1, Don Torino met her eyes directly. Then I spend every day of our marriage trying to earn the yes you're giving me today. I spend every day proving that you made the right choice, not just the necessary one. Valentina sat in stunned silence, trying to process what she was hearing. You're serious, completely. You would really let me walk away, forgive the debts anyway, without hesitation. Why? For the first time since she had met him, Don Torino smiled. It transformed his entire face, making him look younger and far less dangerous. Because, Miss Rossi, I would rather live alone for the rest of my life than live with a woman who married me because she had no other choice. For 3 days, Valentina Rossi lived in a strange limbo between her old life and her uncertain future. Don Torino had given her a week to consider his proposal and had arranged for her to stay in a comfortable guest suite at his estate while she made her decision. It was the first time in her life that anyone had given her real power over her own fate, and the weight of that freedom was almost overwhelming. You seem troubled, miss, said Mrs. Elena Caruso, the housekeeper who had been looking after Valentina during her stay. Perhaps you'd like to take a walk in the gardens? The evening air might clear your mind. Valentina looked up from the book she'd been pretending to read for the past hour. Mrs. Crusoe, may I ask you something? Of course. What kind of man is Don Torino, really? The older woman set down her dust cloth and considered the question carefully. He's a complicated man, miss, capable of great kindness and great ruthlessness, sometimes in the same day, but he's always been fair with those who work for him, and he's never cruel without cause. And as a husband, his first wife was very happy. From what I could see, he was devoted to her, attentive without being possessive. When she died, Mrs. Crusoe's expression grew sad. He blamed himself. Though there was nothing he could have done, she was never strong, and childbirth was too much for her constitution. He's never remarried, never even courted anyone seriously, until now. Valentina set aside her book entirely. Mrs. Crusoe, do you think he's genuinely offering me a choice? Or is this some elaborate manipulation? What do you mean? I mean, is he betting that if he gives me the illusion of choice, I'll be grateful enough to say yes? Is he counting on my family's desperation to make his generosity seem irresistible? Mrs. Crusoe smiled. Miss, I've worked for this family for 20 years. I've seen Don Torino negotiate with judges, senators, and rival family heads. If he wanted to manipulate you into marriage, he wouldn't need to offer you an escape route to do it. Then why is he? Because he's learned that forced loyalty is brittle, and broken hearts make poor foundations for a lifetime together. That evening, Valentina found herself in the library again, drawn by the warmth and comfort she'd felt there during her first meeting with Don Torino. She was surprised to find him already there, reading by lamplight. I'm sorry, she said, starting to retreat. I didn't mean to disturb you. Please stay. I was hoping you might want to talk. Valentina entered the room and settled into her usual chair. About what? About whatever questions are keeping you awake at night. About whatever concerns are making this decision difficult. She studied his face in the lamplight, noting the lines of exhaustion around his eyes. Are you having second thoughts about your offer? No, but I can see that you're struggling with something, and I'd like to help if I can. Valentina took a deep breath, deciding to risk complete honesty. I'm trying to understand why you want to marry me at all. You could have any woman you wanted, wealthy women, educated women, women who come with powerful family connections. Why choose someone whose father gambled away her dowry? Don Torino set down his book and gave her his complete attention. Would you like the honest answer, please? Because in 3 months of observing you, I never once saw you treat another person with anything less than dignity. The way you speak to shop clerks, the patience you show with difficult children at the orphanage, the respect you give to your parents despite their failures. It tells me everything I need to know about your character. Character doesn't make someone a good wife. Character makes someone a good person. Everything else can be learned. Valentina was quiet for a moment, processing this. What would you expect from a wife, from me, specifically, if I chose to marry you? Honesty, companionship, your own opinions, even when they differ from mine, your own interests and pursuits, your own life within our shared life, and children. Something flickered across his expression, too quick for her to interpret. If children come, they'll be welcome. If they don't, that won't change how I feel about you. You're not marrying me to produce heirs. I'm hoping to marry you because I think we could build something meaningful together. Heirs are a bonus, not a requirement. Valentina stood and walked to the window, looking out at gardens lit by strategically placed lamps. Don Torino, Antonio, please, if we're going to have these conversations, we might as well use first names. Antonio. Then, what happens if I say yes and then change my mind? What happens if I marry you and then realize I've made a terrible mistake? Then we talk about it. We try to fix whatever is wrong, and if we can't fix it, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Then we figure out how to end it with as much dignity as possible. You would divorce me. I would never trap you in a marriage that made you miserable. Life is too short and happiness too rare to waste either on stubborn pride. Valentina turned from the window to look at him directly. You realize how unusual you are. Most men in your position would consider a wife's happiness irrelevant, as long as she fulfilled her duties. Most men in my position have never watched someone they love die slowly from unhappiness. The pain in his voice was unmistakable, and Valentina realized she was seeing past his careful control to the grief that still marked him. Your first wife was unhappy, not with me, but with the life I could give her. She wanted a simple existence, a normal marriage, children who could play in parks without bodyguards. Instead, she got a fortress and a husband whose enemies made normal life impossible. And you think I'll be different? I think you understand what my world is like. I think you're strong enough to find happiness despite its limitations. And I think, he hesitated. What? I think you're brave enough to tell me when I'm wrong about something. Which means I'll never have to guess what you're thinking or feeling. Valentina returned to her chair, her mind racing. If I said yes, what would our engagement look like? How long would we wait before the wedding? As long as you wanted. If you needed a year to be certain, we'd wait a year. If you wanted to start immediately, we could marry next month. And during the engagement, we'd get to know each other. Spend time together, learn each other's habits and preferences. Discover whether we actually enjoy each other's company when the pressure is off. Like a real courtship. Exactly like a real courtship. Valentina sat in silence for several minutes, weighing everything she'd learned over the past 3 days. Finally, she looked up to find Antonio watching her with patient attention. I have conditions, she said. Tell me, first, if I say yes, it's to an engagement, not an immediate marriage. I want at least 6 months to be certain we're compatible. Agreed. Second, during the engagement, I want to continue my work at the orphanage and my other activities. I won't become a decoration waiting for marriage, of course. Third, I want your promise that you'll never lie to me about your business or the dangers it might bring to our household. I can't make good decisions if I don't understand the risks. Antonio nodded slowly. That's a dangerous request, Valentina. Knowledge can make you a target. Ignorance can make me dead. I'd rather face danger I understand than danger that catches me unprepared. Fair enough. What else? Last condition. If during our engagement, either of us decides this isn't working, we end it cleanly. No recriminations, no punishment for my family, no using the broken engagement against each other in the future. Agreed completely. Valentina took a deep breath, feeling as if she stood at the edge of a cliff with no way to see the bottom. Then yes, Antonio, I'll marry you, but I'm saying yes to the man who offered me a choice, not to the arrangement my father made. Don't make me regret trusting you. Antonio smiled, and this time the expression reached his eyes completely. Valentina, I'm going to spend every day making sure you never do. If you're captivated by Valentina and Antonio's unconventional courtship, please subscribe to support our storytelling and production costs. 6 weeks into their engagement, Valentina discovered that being courted by a Mafia don was unlike anything the romance novels had prepared her for. Antonio Torino approached winning her affections with the same methodical precision he brought to business negotiations, but with a tenderness that surprised them both. Where are we going today? Valentina asked as she settled into the passenger seat of Antonio's personal car, a modest sedan that bore no resemblance to the armored vehicles his associates preferred. Somewhere I think you'll appreciate, he said, pulling away from the estate with easy confidence. But first, tell me about your week at the orphanage. How is young Michael adjusting to his new placement? Valentina felt the familiar warmth that came whenever Antonio demonstrated his attention to details that mattered to her. He remembered the names of the children she worked with, asked thoughtful questions about their progress, and had even made an anonymous donation that allowed the orphanage to hire a full-time teacher. He's doing better. The nightmares are less frequent, and he's starting to trust Sister Catherine. But he still won't let anyone else help him with his reading. Trauma creates very specific patterns of trust, Antonio observed. Sometimes the only way through them is patience and consistency. You sound like you speak from experience. Antonio was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the steering wheel. I was 8 when my father was killed, old enough to understand what had happened, too young to process it properly. For months, I would only speak to my mother and my Uncle Sal. Everyone else felt dangerous. It was the first time he had shared anything deeply personal about his childhood. And Valentina felt the significance of the disclosure. What helped you learn to trust again? Time. And people who earned it slowly, without expecting dramatic gestures or sudden breakthroughs. They drove through Brooklyn toward Manhattan, leaving behind the familiar neighborhoods of Valentina's childhood. For areas she had only read about in newspapers, when Antonio finally parked, they were standing in front of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. "I remember you mentioning that you'd always wanted to see the Egyptian collection," he said, offering her his arm as they climbed the museum steps. Valentina stared at him in amazement. "That was one comment during dinner 3 weeks ago. I pay attention to what interests you inside the museum." Valentina felt like Alice tumbling down the rabbit hole. She had grown up visiting the small local museums and galleries that her family could afford, but this was something entirely different. Room after room of treasures from across history. Art that had been created by human hands centuries before she was born. "Look at this," she breathed, standing before a painted sarcophagus that had once held an Egyptian queen. "Can you imagine the craftsman who created this? The hours of work, the skill, the devotion?" Antonio watched her face as she studied the ancient artwork, noting how her eyes lit up with genuine curiosity and appreciation. "You have an artist's eye," he said. "You see the human story behind the object, don't you? I see the monetary value, the political significance, the strategic importance of controlling cultural treasures. You see the beauty." They spent 3 hours wandering through galleries, with Valentina providing commentary that revealed both her natural intelligence and her hunger for knowledge that had been largely self-taught. "I always wanted to study art history," she admitted as they sat in the museum cafe sharing tea and pastries. "But practical concerns had to come first." "What would you study if practical concerns weren't an issue?" "Everything. Art, literature, history, languages. I want to understand how people in different times and places made sense of their world." Antonio leaned back in his chair, studying her animated expression. "What's stopping you from studying those things now?" "Money, time, access to proper education, all of which are solvable problems." Valentina paused with her teacup halfway to her lips. "What do you mean?" "I mean that if we marry, your intellectual development becomes as much a priority as anything else in our life together. Tutors, university courses, travel to see art and architecture in person. Whatever feeds your curiosity, you would do that." "Valentina, I'm not looking for a wife who will shrink to fit my world. I'm looking for someone who will expand it." That evening, as they drove back to Brooklyn, Valentina found herself studying Antonio's profile in the dashboard lights. "Can I ask you something personal? Always. Why didn't you remarry sooner? You've been alone for 5 years." Antonio was quiet for so long that Valentina wondered if she had overstepped. Finally, he spoke. "Because I couldn't see the point of marriage without partnership. I can hire people to manage my household, cook my meals, and organize my social obligations. But I can't hire someone to challenge my thinking, share my interests, or care about my dreams beyond their impact on family business." "And you think I can do those things?" "I think you're already doing them." Valentina felt something shift inside her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with gratitude or obligation and everything to do with the growing realization that she was genuinely beginning to care for this complicated, thoughtful man. "Antonio, can I tell you something?" "Of course." "When my father first told me about the marriage arrangement, I spent weeks planning how I would survive being married to a stranger. I practiced being polite but distant, keeping my thoughts and feelings private, building a life within the life I was being forced to accept. And now I'm starting to forget to be guarded. I'm starting to look forward to our conversations, to wonder what you think about things, to care whether you're happy or troubled." Antonio pulled the car over to the side of the road, parking beneath a street lamp that cast everything in golden light. "Valentina, is that frightening for you?" "Terrifying," she admitted, "because it means this is becoming real. Not just an arrangement or a practical solution, but something that could actually matter. And if it matters, it can hurt you." "Exactly." Antonio turned in his seat to face her completely. "I can't promise you that loving me won't hurt sometimes. I can't promise you that my world won't bring complications and dangers into your life. but I can promise you that I will never deliberately cause you pain, and I will do everything in my power to make sure that what we build together is worth whatever risks come with it." Valentina looked into his dark eyes and saw something she hadn't expected to find there. Vulnerability. This powerful, dangerous man was as uncertain about their future as she was, as afraid of making the wrong choice, as hopeful that what they were building might last. "What if we're making a mistake?" she asked quietly. "Then we'll make it together, and we'll figure out how to fix it together. And if we're making the right choice," Antonio smiled, reaching over to take her hand, "then we'll be very lucky people." As they sat in the car beneath the street lamp, holding hands and talking about everything and nothing, Valentina realized that something fundamental had changed. She was no longer thinking about how to survive marriage to Antonio Torino. She was beginning to wonder if she might actually be falling in love with him. The crisis came on a Tuesday evening in November, arriving with the sudden violence that characterized life in Antonio's world. Valentina was reading in the library when Mrs. Crusoe appeared in the doorway, her face pale with worry. "Miss Rossi, Don Torino needs to see you immediately, in his study." Valentina marked her place in the book and followed the housekeeper through hallways that suddenly felt charged with tension. She could hear voices from behind the study door, speaking in rapid Italian with the urgency of men discussing life and death. "Wait here," Mrs. Crusoe said, knocking softly before entering the study alone. Through the partially open door, Valentina caught glimpses of several men in dark suits, their faces grim, their postures alert. Antonio stood behind his desk, his expression colder than she had ever seen it, looking every inch the dangerous man whose reputation kept enemies awake at night. "Send her in," he said quietly. Valentina entered the study to find herself facing 5 men who looked like they could kill without changing expression. Antonio gestured for her to sit in the chair directly in front of his desk, positioning her so that she was under his protection, but clearly part of whatever conversation was about to take place. "Gentlemen," Antonio said, his voice carrying absolute authority, "this is my fiancée, Valentina Rossi. Valentina, these are associates of mine who need to understand our situation." "What situation?" Valentina asked, proud that her voice remained steady despite the fear beginning to build in her chest. "Vincent Castellano has made a move against our family," Antonio explained. "He's kidnapped your cousin Maria and is demanding that I break our engagement as ransom for her safe return." Valentina felt the blood drain from her face. Maria was only 16, the daughter of her father's brother, a sweet girl who had never hurt anyone in her life. Why would he do that? Because our marriage represents an alliance between the Rossi and Torino families that threatens his plans for territorial expansion. He's betting that I'll choose your cousin's life over our engagement. One of the men at the table leaned forward. "Don Torino, with respect, the girl's life hangs in the balance. Surely the engagement can be reconsidered." "The engagement," Antonio said coldly, "is not mine alone to reconsider." All eyes turned to Valentina, and she suddenly understood why she had been brought into this room. She wasn't here to be protected or informed. She was here to make a choice. "What exactly is Castellano demanding?" she asked. "That I publicly announce the end of our engagement and return you to your father's house. In exchange, he releases your cousin unharmed, and if you refuse, he kills Maria and declares war on both our families." Valentina sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of what was being asked of her. A 16-year-old girl's life hung in the balance, and the price of saving her was Valentina's own future. "How long do we have to decide?" "He wants an answer by midnight," Antonio said. "For hours. And what happens to our families if we refuse? If we let him start this war?" Antonio's expression grew even grimmer. "People die, many people, including, most likely, your cousin." Valentina looked around the room at the faces of men waiting for her decision. They were all watching her with various degrees of expectation, calculation, and pity. "I'd like to speak with Antonio privately," she said. "Gentlemen," Antonio said immediately, "give us the room." After the men had filed out, closing the door behind them, Valentina remained in her chair, her hands folded in her lap, her mind racing through possibilities and consequences. "You know what I have to do," she said quietly. "No," Antonio replied. "I know what you think you have to do. There's a difference. A girl's life is at stake, Antonio. An innocent girl who's being punished for a decision she had no part in making. And your life, your future, the choice you made to build something with me, none of that matters?" Valentina stood and walked to the window, looking out at gardens that had become familiar over the past 2 months. "Of course it matters, but I can't build happiness on the foundation of someone else's death. Even if walking away from me destroys any chance you'll ever have of choosing your own path again." "What do you mean?" Antonio moved to stand beside her at the window. "If you break our engagement to save your cousin, Castellano wins. He learns that he can control my decisions by threatening people I care about. Do you think he'll stop with Maria? Do you think your family will ever be safe again once he knows he can manipulate me through them? So what's the alternative? Let an innocent girl die to protect our engagement. The alternative is that we refuse to be manipulated and we find another way to save your cousin." Valentina turned to face him. "What other way?" "We give Castellano something he wants more than our broken engagement." "Which is?" Antonio's expression became dangerous, predatory. "His life." The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Valentina realized she was seeing the other side of the man she had been falling in love with, the side that made him powerful enough to protect what he valued and ruthless enough to destroy what threatened it. "You're talking about killing him. I'm talking about ending a threat to everyone I care about. And Maria, what happens to her if you move against Castellano? We get her back first. Then we deal with him permanently." Valentina sat down heavily, the weight of the decision crushing. "How leave that to me? No." She looked up at him with sudden determination. "If I'm going to be part of this decision, I need to understand all of it. How do you plan to rescue Maria without getting her killed?" Antonio studied her face, seeming to weigh how much truth she could handle. "Castellano is holding her at a warehouse in Queens. We know the location. We know his security arrangements, and we have people on the inside. A coordinated rescue operation could succeed, but it requires precise timing and considerable risk." "Risk to whom?" "To my men. To Maria if something goes wrong. To you if Castellano realizes you're part of the planning. And to you. I'll be leading the rescue personally." Valentina felt her heart constrict with fear. "Antonio, what if you're killed? What if this whole plan fails and we lose everything? Then at least we'll have tried to save an innocent life without surrendering to a bully's demands." Valentina stood and began pacing the length of the study, her mind working through scenarios and consequences. "There's another option," she said. Finally, "What?" "I go to Castellano myself. I offer to break the engagement voluntarily, without you giving in to his demands. He gets what he wants, Maria goes free, and your reputation for not negotiating with kidnappers stays intact." "Absolutely not." "Why not?" "Because the moment you walk into that warehouse, you become another hostage. Because Castellano isn't interested in a voluntary withdrawal. He wants to humiliate me publicly, to prove that he can force my hand. And because," Antonio stopped her pacing by taking her shoulders in his hands, "and because I am not losing you to save face or maintain strategy. Not now, not ever." The intensity in his voice made Valentina's breath catch. "Antonio, no. Listen to me. 2 months ago, I offered you a choice because I believed you deserved one. But that was before I knew what it would feel like to love you. That was before I understood that losing you would be like losing half my soul. You love me, completely, desperately, in ways that probably make me a fool, but definitely make me dangerous to anyone who threatens you." Valentina felt tears begin to form in her eyes. "I love you too, which is why I can't let you risk your life for my cousin, and which is why I can't let you sacrifice yourself for mine." They stood facing each other in the lamplight, both of them understanding that the choice they made in the next few hours would define not just their future together, but the kind of people they were willing to be when everything they cared about was at stake. "What if there was a third option?" Valentina said slowly. "Tell me, what if we rescue Maria, but we also give Castellano a way to save face? Something that looks like a victory for him but actually strengthens your position." Antonio's eyes sharpened with interest. What do you have in mind? We postpone the wedding, publicly. Make it look like his pressure campaign worked, that we're having second thoughts about the alliance. Meanwhile, we use the delay to gather intelligence on his operations, identify his weaknesses, and plan a more comprehensive response. And Maria, we get her back tonight, but we make it look like she escaped on her own, that his security was inadequate rather than that we outmaneuvered him. Antonio was quiet for a long moment, considering the proposal. It could work, but it would mean months of pretending our relationship is troubled, of giving our enemies hope that our alliance is weak. Can you live with that? Can you? Pretend to be unsure about us when you've just told me you love me? Valentina smiled through her tears. I can do anything if it means we all survive this with our dignity and our hearts intact. Antonio pulled her into his arms, holding her close enough that she could feel his heartbeat against her cheek. Then, we have a plan, but Valentina, I need you to understand something. What, after tonight, there's no going back to the life you had before. Once you're part of planning something like this, once you're truly my partner in this world, you'll never be able to claim innocence again. Valentina pulled back to look at his face. Are you trying to give me one last chance to walk away? I'm trying to make sure you understand what you're choosing. I'm choosing you. I'm choosing us. I'm choosing to be the kind of woman who fights for what she loves instead of surrendering to what she fears. Antonio kissed her then, deep and desperate and full of promise. Then let's go save your cousin and show Vincent Castellano what happens when he threatens our family. The warehouse district of Queens at midnight looked like a graveyard for abandoned dreams. All rusted metal and broken windows under a sky that couldn't decide between snow and rain. Valentina crouched behind a shipping container, her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched Antonio's men move into position around the building where her cousin was being held. Remember, Antonio whispered beside her, his breath warm against her ear. You stay here until we give the all-clear signal. No matter what you hear, no matter what goes wrong, you don't move until it's safe. And if it's not safe, if something happens to you, then you run. You get back to the car, you drive to the safe house, and you forget you were ever here tonight. Valentina gripped his arm. I'm not leaving without you and Maria. You are, if that's what it takes to keep you alive. Before she could argue further, Antonio kissed her hard and quick, then disappeared into the shadows with the fluid silence of a man who had done this too many times before. Waiting was agony. Valentina counted her heartbeats and tried to interpret every sound that drifted across the industrial wasteland. A car door slamming, footsteps on gravel, the distant murmur of voices speaking in tones too low to understand. Then the shooting started. The crack of gunfire split the night air like thunder, followed by shouts and the sound of running feet. Valentina pressed herself deeper into the shadows behind the shipping container, every instinct screaming at her to run toward the danger, to find Antonio and make sure he was safe. More shots, a scream that might have been Maria's voice, the crash of glass breaking, then silence. Valentina waited, counting seconds that felt like hours, until she heard the signal. 3 long whistle notes followed by 2 short ones. All clear. She ran toward the warehouse, her heels clicking against concrete, her coat streaming behind her like wings inside. She found chaos, overturned tables, scattered papers, the sharp smell of gunpowder and fear. Valentina, Maria's voice came from across the room. The 16-year-old was wrapped in a blanket, sitting on a crate while one of Antonio's men checked her for injuries. She was pale and shaken, but clearly unharmed. Are you hurt? Valentina demanded, wrapping her cousin in her arms. No, just scared. They didn't hurt me, just kept me tied up in that room over there. But Valentina, how did you know where to find me? That's a long story. Where's Antonio? Here, came his voice from behind her. Valentina turned to find him emerging from what looked like an office, his suit jacket torn and a thin line of blood across his left cheekbone. But he was alive, walking under his own power, and when their eyes met across the warehouse, she felt her knees nearly buckle with relief. Castellano, she asked. Gone. He ran when the shooting started, left his men to handle the situation. We captured 2 of them alive for questioning. But Vincent himself escaped. So this isn't over. No, it's not. But Maria is safe, and we've sent a message that threatening our family carries a price. One of Antonio's men approached them, his expression grim. Don Torino, we need to go. Police will be here soon, and we don't want to explain the scene. Of course, Maria, can you walk? I think so. As they prepared to leave the warehouse, Valentina caught Antonio's arm. What happens now? With us, I mean. Do we still pretend to postpone the wedding? Antonio looked around at the wreckage of their rescue operation, at his men efficiently erasing evidence of their presence, at Maria clinging to Valentina's hand like a lifeline. No, he said quietly, we don't pretend anything anymore. What? Do you mean? I mean that tonight proved something I should have understood months ago. You're not just the woman I want to marry. You're already my partner, my equal, my match in every way that matters. Antonio, marry me. Valentina, not because of arrangements or debts or family obligations. Marry me because you love me and I love you, and because what we've built together is worth fighting for. Valentina looked around the warehouse, at the evidence of violence and danger that would always be part of loving this man. Then she looked at Maria, safe because Antonio had risked everything to save her. Finally, she looked at Antonio himself, this complicated, dangerous, devoted man who had offered her choice when she had none and stood by her, when she needed someone to stand with. Yes, she said simply, but not because you're asking, because I'm choosing. 6 months later, they were married in the garden of the Torino estate, surrounded by flowers that Valentina had planted herself and witnesses who understood that. They were celebrating not just a wedding, but the victory of choice over circumstance, love over obligation, partnership over possession. As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Antonio whispered in her ear, "Any regrets?" Valentina smiled, thinking of the trunk that had been packed for her a year ago, of the girl who had been so afraid of losing herself in marriage to a stranger. "Only one," she said. "What's that?" "That it took me so long to realize that the best choices are the ones we make together." Antonio spun her around the dance floor, both of them laughing with the joy of people who had found exactly what they didn't know they were looking for. "Mrs. Torino," he said, "I think we're going to be very happy." "Mr. Torino," she replied, "I think we already are." As the music played and their families celebrated around them, Valentina realized that sometimes the most important journey wasn't the one that took you away from where you started, but the one that brought you home to where you belonged. She had packed her trunk for a man she'd never met, but she had unpacked her heart for the man she chose to love, and that, she thought, made all the difference in the world. Thank you for following Valentina and Antonio's beautiful journey, from arrangement to true love. If you enjoyed this story of choice, respect, and earning love through patience, please subscribe to help support our production efforts and bring you more compelling tales like this.